Before the Constitutional Convention notes, debates and compromises. You should have a student note sheet that has each of, it looks like 4 different columns with different boxes in them. It talks about 4 different issues. At the Constitutional Convention, there were 55 delegates who met in the summer in Philadelphia, and they met with intentions. Well, they were different intentions depending on the delegates. Within this Constitutional Convention, there would be arguments and compromises galore, but what there wouldn't be is reporting out of what actually happened there. Now, there were notes taken, and that's how we know what happened there, but the news of what was being created and the debates that occurred was not released until after the Constitution was ratified. So there's many issues surrounding the convention. So these are each of the 4 issues that are going to be on the top of your sheet. You will be able to see these issues again later in the PowerPoint, but I just wanted to give you a big picture here first. Should we just change the Articles, or should they create an entirely new government? The Articles of Confederation were obviously not working with Shays' Rebellion, with the inability to tax, with other governments sort of circling the wagon, so to speak, as the United States owed them money from the Revolution. There had actually even been situations where there was an amendment that was proposed in order to give the federal government, the national government, the ability to tax. But one little baby state, Rhode Island, refused to ratify that amendment, and because it took all 13 states to ratify the amendment, it just wasn't going to happen. Next question, or next issue, was representation. The legislative branch is the body of people who represent the individuals or the area, and they actually write the law, so they're extremely powerful. How would those states and the people be represented? Smaller states, which had always been, states had always been sort of the political entity that these people had survived under. Smaller states wanted to make sure that their state had equal representation and was not overwhelmed by the larger states. The larger states said, hey, we have more people, so each person should sort of be represented. A third question or third issue was, should there be national or local control? The Articles of Confederation have an enormous amount of local control, where most of the laws that people lived under were state laws. But would there be a stronger federal government, or would there be more local control? This, of course, would be freedom versus safety, so liberty versus order. Which was more important, to have national order or to have individual freedom at the potential cost of safety of the nation? The last question, should there be a Bill of Rights to protect freedoms from the government? Should there be limitations on what the government can do to people? So issue 1, and you can go ahead and pause this at any time to help yourself fill out the notes sheet. So amend the Articles, or should there be an entirely new government? The Anti-Federalists were sort of the first argument. They said, amend the Articles, don't throw them out. We had already created this set of government. Why should we go any further? These were the principles that the Revolution was founded upon. States should resist a powerful central government, because that is how Great Britain eventually, previously had controlled them. Thomas Jefferson, who was a really powerful anti-federalist, and other anti-federalists were given powerful positions of diplomats within the Articles of Confederation. So they were in Europe or in other countries around the world, and were not available for this Constitutional Convention. Some anti-federalists, like Patrick Henry, were in the country, but they refused to go to the convention because they felt like it was a losing cause. There were so many Federalists that were going to this convention that they felt like they were going to be overwhelmed. Argument number 2 was the Federalists. They wanted to end the Articles of Confederation and replace it with a powerful government. The Articles of Confederation had not met or had not performed before, so it was time to edit them. In fact, edit them so much that it would be more prudent to just create a new government. The delegates that met were largely Federalists and met little opposition to create a new constitution. So in this scenario, in your compromise box, you can write there's no compromise. The change is going to happen. The argument to amend the Articles was gone, though those arguments of the structure of the articles would still be sort of used. The end goal of this convention was to actually create a new government. Now, deciding how that new government and how that new constitution would be written, that is the next step. So as I said before, the legislature is the most important branch. It's the closest to the people. It writes the laws. It's supposed to be the most powerful. Of course, this is Article 1 in the Constitution, so it's the first thing that they dealt with. Argument 1, large states believe that the people should be represented by population. Felt that it was unfair for small states to have the same laws, making powers as large states. So, Virginia has almost 900,000 people, and Rhode Island has, 80,000 people. Well, in the Articles of Confederation, they would have the same power regardless of the fact that Virginia was 10 times larger than Rhode Island. They felt that that was unfair. States, they said, are not self-governing. They are deaf and dumb, which means that the country is more important than the states, that the states are just like this political entity or this creation by the people. The states themselves shouldn't have rights. It should be the people. So individuals are what count. And this is their sort of rallying cry. Equal number of people deserve equal number of votes. The Virginia Plan is the famous plan that was issued that took this idea and created this government, obviously made by Virginia, the most populous state in the Union. Argument 2, the argument 2 was small states. They said, listen, each state should have a single vote. They should be equal. The purpose of the convention, originally, they were brought there not to create a new government, but to revise the articles, so they felt like they got tricked. Country had been built on states' rights. That was part of the Revolution. In the Revolution, of course, they were afraid of big government. So why would we continue on a path that create big government? And you had to have powerful state governments in order to do that. Representation by population will ruin small states. So if Virginia did get 10 times as many votes as Rhode Island did, Rhode Island would have no power. They would basically be the lapdog of the big states. Equal states deserve equal votes is their rallying cry. They favored what's called the New Jersey Plan, which again was a proposal to create a legislature where each state was allowed to choose their representatives, but each state got the equal number of votes when they were deciding whether to pass a bill or not. So there's two compromises for representation that were made. One was the Great Compromise. This was called the Connecticut Plan. This created a bicameral legislature, which means there's two houses. One would be divided proportionally. That's what we know of today as the House of Representatives. In the state of Iowa right now, for example, there are 4 districts. That means that we have 4 representatives in the House from Iowa. Now, you and I only live in one. It's the 1st District of Iowa. It's in northeast corner. A guy named Bruce Braley is our representative. Then the other chamber, the other part of the legislature would be the Senate, which is based on equal distribution. Each state has 2 senators. The state of Iowa has 2 senators. Grassley and Harkin are currently our 2 senators. Now, everybody in the state, or the senator actually represents everybody in the state, even though there's 2 of them. They don't split it in half or anything like the House of Representatives does. The delegate from Connecticut suggested this, so it's called the Connecticut Compromise, or the Great Compromise, or I'm sorry, the Connecticut Plan or the Great Compromise. So once they were able to compromise and settle on this, they were able to sort of go on to the next phase, which is, well, how do we count slaves? Are they people? Are they property? South said, yeah, they count as people in the House of Representatives. They wanted them to be counted as a full person. Now, the South wasn't going to give them the right to vote, but they wanted them to be eligible to increase their sort of power in the House of Representatives. The North said, no, that's not going to work because it's actually taking power away from the North and giving it to the South. A Southern person, a Southern citizen who could vote would actually have more power in the House of Representatives than a person who was in the North and didn't have those slaves to count towards their population. So the compromise, this sort of dark, dirty little compromise that's a stain on American history, is called the 3/5 Compromise, states could count 3/5 of their state populations of slaves towards their total population. So this sort of officially sanctioned or officially, approved of slavery in the Constitution. This decided the House of Representatives. Now, let me remind you that the slaves could not vote, but they did count as 3/5 of a person towards the population. Issue number 3, should there be national control or local control? So argument number 1 was control should be national, that's unitary. These people were called Federalists. Their arguments were, hey, if you have 2 different governments ruling over the same group of people, that's really confusing, that they would conflict, there's going to be all sorts of problems. So it makes more sense and it's more efficient to just have one national government over each citizen. States should basically be there to administer the laws. The national government can pass laws and the states would then be delegated the power to carry them out. If the Articles of Confederation continues, the argument is we would end up with 13 different nation states. We would look like Europe. There would be all of these different countries, and that would end up leading to war. We wouldn't be unified, and we wouldn't have sort of the economic and military power that we could together. And their assertion was that the national government must have infinite authority. This is very important because then the national government can do what they need to do in cases like the Shays Rebellion. Argument number 2, these were the Anti-Federalists. They wanted to have a local/state power. This was like a confederation. The only purpose of the national government, they would claim, is to protect the states. There should be a national legislature. Should the national legislature be able to veto state laws? And their famous question was, how can someone in Georgia know what's good for people in New Hampshire? Right? How can somebody in Washington, D.C. veto a law that the people in South Carolina really want to have in place? That doesn't seem fair. It doesn't sort of leave a good taste in your mouth. So the compromise was what's called federalism. And we'll go into more detail in the next set of notes about this, but federalism is a complex system where there are shared powers between national and state government. James Madison, who wrote the notes for the Constitutional Convention, he's why we know what happened, pitches this, he suggests this, that maybe states could put laws into effect and then have the government rule on them later when there was some sort of conflict. This would create a federal state where we would have states be able to make certain decisions, and this is the structure that we have now. So states can set traffic laws, and states can set education laws, and states can, but then there's some things that both state and federal government can do. Both states and federal governments can tax us. Both state and federal governments can charge us with crimes. But what the federal government has is national supremacy. So if there's a law that the state passes and the federal government doesn't like it, or it doesn't fall within the Constitution or the structure of the rest of the country, the federal government can then later go back and tell the state, nah, you can't do that. So what about the Bill of Rights? Should there be a Bill of Rights? Should there be like a list of rules that of things that the government can't do? One argument, this was the Anti-Federalists actually, there had to be a list. They wanted a weak central government anyway, but they also recognized if there wasn't a list of things the government can't do, the government's going to overstep those bounds all the time and turn into this dictatorship or like a monarchy like they had before. The new Constitution repeals the state declarations of rights, so a big government could take control of people's states' rights without a Bill of Rights. The new Constitution basically overpowers the state's laws and the state's set of rights. So there must be something written into the Constitution in order to make sure that the federal government doesn't get too powerful. Argument number 2, these are Federalists, say that would be pretty stupid to have a list. They wanted a strong federal government anyway, but they also argued that state declarations of rights are not repealed by the Constitution. They're just ruled upon at a later time. But the argument was having a Bill of Rights was impractical. How can you possibly list all the rights? What if you leave one out? Then the federal government can do that. Nowhere in the Bill of Rights, for example, does it say that I have the right to walk along the street any time of the day I want. But yet the federal government can't sort of stop me from doing that. So But if we started having to list them all out, then that would be silly. The compromise was that there was actually the first 10 amendments, and it wasn't written into the Constitution, but it was promised that these 10 amendments would be ratified and action would be taken as soon as the Constitution itself was ratified. And that's what happened. This protects individual rights, and the 10th Amendment protected the states' rights. James Madison, a Federalist, writes the Bill of Rights. So other Federalists would sort of agree. And the promise was that the first act of Congress, first action of Congress would be to write up and pass these Bill of Rights, these 10 amendments. Well, and there's actually 12 proposed, but only 10 of them were ratified. And then they would send them to the states to ratify them themselves and thus implement those Bill of Rights. Ultimately, James Madison feared without the Bill of Rights, the Constitution wouldn't have been ratified. So he was probably right there. So he conceded, he compromised, he actually wrote the Bill of Rights, and he probably ensured that the Constitution would be ratified by all 13 of the states.